Welcome to the episode. This one's about Tales of Khayaal. Tales of Khayaal is basically a visionary storytelling project created by Peter Gould and Rehan Khan. The aim is to blend the timeless wisdom of Islamic heritage with the creativity of modern visual media. It's founded on the idea that imagination, or khayal, can serve as a bridge between tradition and innovation. The project seeks to reawaken spiritual narratives through evocative art, design, and storytelling. To give you a brief overview of each of my guests for this episode, Peter Gould is an internationally recognized designer and a creative entrepreneur known for his Muslim-inspired design. He joins forces with Rehan Khan, who's a novelist and a thinker celebrated for his historical fiction and reflective writing. Rehan is the author of A Tudor Turk and A King's Armor, among other books as well. Together, they've crafted Tales of Khayaal as a platform where sacred imagination meets contemporary storytelling. And the aim, I suppose, is to inspire a new generation to rediscover purpose and faith through the power of story. So I'm looking forward to the episode. Let's begin.
Reports confirm you are watching this video right now, but shockingly, you have not yet liked or subscribed. Please do so.
Assalamu alaikum. How's it going?
Walaikum assalam.
Thanks, Salam. Good to see you, Furqan. How's things?
Awesome. It's great. So you've got a visitor next to you.
Yeah, very special guest. So this is my longtime friend and collaborator with Tales of Khayaal. So author and alhamdulillah in the last couple of years, the co-creator that we've been building this together. But he's had a, mashallah, very illustrious career doing different things. But, ultimately the last couple of years have really been about, I think what we're talking about today with Khayaal, it's been a really beautiful journey.
Sure. So can you tell me a little bit more about yourself, Brother Rehan?
Yeah, no, sure, Furqan. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really good to connect with you and to be able to speak to the people who are listening into your podcast as well. So, so I've kind of spent a lot of time in the corporate sector. I worked in the future of work, but I've always been writing novels. So Tales of Khayaal is my 8th novel, and I've done a lot of novels of historic fiction. So I've been writing for about 16 odd years, various novels. Some have got, awards and others as well. And then these days I spend my time doing a bit of teaching. So I'm a professor. I teach some subjects around AI, future of work. I do some stuff around leadership, and then do courses on storytelling and how to write a novel and things like that. And really working on this startup with Peter on Tales of Khayaal and really getting the novels out there and then building hopefully an ecosystem for other cross-media kind of platform plays as well.
Look, it sounds like a really interesting project. Can you give us an idea as to what inspired you to both create Tales of Khayaal?
Yeah, do you want?
Yeah, sure. I'll go back a little bit. Bismillah. So, in around 2021, this kind of era, I was introduced to, or I was speaking more with one of my teachers about the concept of khayal, the meanings of it, and understanding that this is historically very rich term, a whole volume that 1,000 years ago someone wrote about the imagination from the Islamic perspective, and alhamdulillah, so I've been Muslim now for over 20 years, but I hadn't really heard too much about this mode of this faculty of imagination, and it kind of sparked my curiosity. Well, what does that mean? But also, what might that mean for fictional creative world, where imagination is a deeper modality of understanding meaning and the meanings behind forms, and it sort of coincided with me also, probably like yourself and many, probably millions of people, hoping and aspiring to see more representation of both kind of Islamic concepts, but in a universal way, through media and through, popular, kind of products like, games and comics and so on. And also, with my own kids and within our community, our young people, what they're exposed to. How do we have better representation? How do we create meaningful stories? But not in a, not in a kind of expected, necessarily preachy or specifically religious instruction way, but in a universally relatable way, but authentically from our tradition. So this kind of started the journey a little bit. And the first phase, we kind of developed some ideas around doing mini comics. We did a crowdfund for that, which did really well. And we developed these comics, just mini comics like these, 5, 6 stories, and started crafting this world and this idea of what this could be. We had some interest from different media partners like TRT, the Ertugrul team. We met them in Istanbul a couple of times. There was a strong interest in what we're doing, but I realized really what we needed to have a more robust world, a more complete world, a lot more input from for an experienced storyteller that had written popular novels, and that came in the form of meeting Rehan about 2022, 23. And as I was sharing a bit about Khayaal, I knew very quickly this is a very aligned and dedicated storyteller that I would love to work with. And when I was introducing Tales of Khayaal, I think we got connected and chatting pretty quickly about planning maybe what might be the next era of Khayaal in a very much more cohesive way. And Rehan, that's your cue.
So that's
Yeah,
very
no, I think,
interesting.
yeah, go on, Furqan, please.
No, please go ahead. You were saying something.
Yeah, no. So I think it was a really great opportunity for me because I'd written several books which were historic fiction, and when Peter called me in December 2022, I was just writing a novel that time, historic fiction that was set in Palestine, Jordan, and Syria in 90 BC, so before Christianity comes to the region, and it was like a story of power struggles and Western powers and resources in the Middle East and so on. And it's an adventure story called Tomb of Empires. And that I finished that in May 2023. So I'd said to Peter in December that when he called me, I said, look, I'm writing something else right now. But when I finish this, let's talk. So he very kindly waited for 6 months. And when I finished and everything went off to the editor in May 2023, we then turned our attention to looking at creating this kind of narrative around Tales of Khayaal and really imagining what a fantasy sci-fi genre-based novel set in a different world, what would the setting look like? What's the tech in this world? What's the science? What's the mysticism? Who are the people? Who are the characters? What are their human struggles? What's the politics of the place? What's the economics of the place? What's the culture? What's the language, right? What's the belief system? We started looking at all of that. We started thinking about what's the plot structure? What's the narrative arc? How are we going to shape this, calibrate this, story to make it compelling, interesting, and then essentially layering the story with different components of maybe, subtle elements of tarbiyah, subtle elements of moral questions, subtle elements of, spiritual alignment to fitra and so on. So, we kind of looked at all of those things, and then I kind of got writing after all that sort of kind of design, collaboration work with Peter. And then really just working with Peter throughout the whole writing process and collaborating on different ideas and so on. So that was really how it got started. And, the book just came out on the 26th of September, alhamdulillah. And inshallah, hopefully it's the first of many in the series.
Very interesting. Look, you've touched on it slightly, but I'm really curious as to what role Islamic tradition and heritage basically plays in shaping the story of Tales of Khayaal.
Yeah, I think what we've first of all tried to do is we related a little bit of our own journeys and reflections. We spent a lot of time on intentionality. And alhamdulillah, we were also in Medina together and reflecting on certain texts together. For example, the Hikam of Ibn Atta'illah, and thinking about how our teachers and the alhamdulillah, the people we've learned from more broadly around the world, in the decade prior, really helped, help inshallah improve ourselves on the journey that individually we've been on and with our families and communities. And, we spend a lot of time, consciously think about if we're working together, what is the real niyyah? What is the long-term mission for this collaboration? So we spent time, and I think that really is if we think of it holistically, that's really that's the foundation for anything. Is that so the whole project in itself, making sure we have a conscious, aligned intention for what it is. It wasn't starting out going like, hey, we can make this super popular franchise. We can, we really want to make a game. Let's make a game. I had, had that approach in the past with things, but here it's like, let's not be so rigid on the outcomes. Let's start with the sincerity to build together and share the elements from those spiritual teachings in a creative, fictional way, in a way that would invite anyone from any background to, inshallah, resonate or learn in some way, or invite them to this kind of spiritual reflection through the creative work we're building. So it really started with that intention. I think, Rehan, maybe you can share more about how then that came to life in the world and the stories.
Yeah, so the story is kind of set on this fictional planet called Iklil, and it's set in what we call the third epoch, which is the third and final age of this planet. And the lore, so Lore, the lore goes into explaining what happened in the first epoch and the second epoch, and that's kind of a different story. But in essence, what happens is that in the third epoch, a very old enemy of humanity is coming back called Mortan. And most of the humans have kind of forgotten about Mortan. And this comet arrives and it signals the end time. Okay, the final standing is approaching. And really what we're looking at from what the novel is exploring is this idea about what does it mean to be human in an age of techno-scientific change? When so much is happening around you, that is changing dramatically. Science and technology is changing. What does it mean to be human? How can you hold on to your fitra at this time when there are so many veils of darkness around you? Now, of course, since the book is set in a fictional world, the referencing is to the creator. The referencing is to having, some people have a Nurani disposition, that of light, of Nur. And some people have a Dhulmi disposition towards, maybe darkness and covering up. So the metaphors are related to anyone who comes from a faith tradition. It could be the Islamic tradition, it could be Taoist, could be any Abrahamic, could be Confucianist, could be Buddhist, could be Native American. Anyone who comes from a faith tradition that involves a creator and a created, where the created is on a journey of suluk, a journey of wayfaring back to the creator. Anyone from that tradition will recognize and feel comfortable, like an old glove that fits into your hand. You'll feel comfortable. I know this world, right? And so, all of and maybe we can get onto this a little bit later on, all the systems and, like you have magic systems and so on, all these kind of systems are designed more from a spiritual perspective, but that's kind of, we can probably get into that a little bit later on in the podcast, but yeah.
Sure. Without giving away any kind of spoilers, what central journey or arc ties all of the stories together? I understand there's different stories. It's an anthology of stories.
Yeah, so there are certain central characters within the novel. And, from a story arc perspective, of course, you have different characters developing differently. But really, everything is working towards this kind of final standing that is gonna be coming. And are the people ready for it, right? Because those people, there are a certain group of individuals who are called conduits, who can channel certain kind of divine energy. There's not many of them left. So the very few people that you need to help get you out of this problem, there's not many of them left. And again, one could look at that as a metaphor for traditional belief systems in our world, where there's this great time of confusion, anarchy, kind of fitna. Where are those saints, scholars, spiritual guides? They are there, right? But you have to look for them, right? And they're difficult to find. And some of them, they don't want to be known. They want to be known by God, but they don't want to be known by the people. But they are the individuals that if you go and spend time with, you can hopefully fix your own soul and align yourself. So in some ways, it's a metaphor for what we see in our world. But again, we're creating a fictional universe where ultimately it's about storytelling, it's about action, adventure, page turner of a novel, but there is kind of layering and texturing of these metaphors, which anyone in our time can recognize and say, "Oh, I see what you're getting at." And science fiction and fantasy has always served that purpose. You can say things about our world without pointing the finger at anyone in our world and no one feeling uncomfortable, because ultimately no one thinks they're the bad guy, right? Even in our world today, trials and tribulations, anyone who's doing wrong, no one likes to see themselves as a bad guy, because that gives what's called cognitive dissonance, right? And no one likes that feeling of like, I'm doing something wrong. So then again, you don't need to point the finger at anyone. You can just create this fictional world and people can draw metaphor and meaning from that.
Sure. Are there any particular storytellers in the past or in the present who basically shaped the vision for Tales of Khayaal?
I think I'll say I'll zoom out a level and say I think what I really appreciate about this kind of blend or alchemy of the two of us collaborating at length, the last couple of years, a lot of chai, a lot of biryani, a lot of sitting in Rehan's house in Dubai and here and really trying to work hard on developing something unique and memorable but meaningful. Um, is the set of influences we both draw from, from the youngest times to, recent times in our journey through maybe parenting and the media and different things that, might have we experienced. So for example, definitely classical influences in my journey from, reading Lord of the Rings at a young age, classic things like that. But also, I grew up playing video games and, really appreciated certain games created these really imaginative, very engaging worlds, and the game world experiences in certain games, last with you, and so that's been present in my journey, and I've always had this affinity for how you can make interactive design experiences in a great game world. And of course, reading throughout, but I think the level of literate exposure and experience that Rehan has as a writer and a reader, brought this rich set of influences from both. So I might have been playing, I don't know, a Baldur's Gate kind of role playing game set in a Dungeons and Dragons universe, or playing really gripping stories like The Last of Us or Half-Life universe with very strong environmental storytelling. Um, you know, that's a lot of my recent experience. And Rehan is, well, maybe you can share the kind of stories and worlds that, influence and how, on one hand, we're chatting to someone from Ubisoft, but also someone that's, very experienced. I mean, you interviewed Brandon Sanderson, as part of your literary festival work, and, I'll let you share more.
Yeah, no, look, I think, whenever you're writing and before you take on a project to write a novel, there's a certain level of conditioning that you have to do as a writer. Just as an athlete, for example, goes and does altitude training, and they do that to condition themselves for the race. So when Peter said, "Oh, can we work on this?" Then again, I was thinking, well, how can I get myself ready to actually before I even start writing it? So the previous books I've written, I wrote one whole trilogy, which was a Tudor Turk series, which was set in the Ottoman Empire and Tudor England in the 16th century. So before I took on that project, I was reading books on Ottoman history, on Tudor history. And I was preparing myself then to write the book. So I was reading academic books to get ready to write the book. And of course, I was reading adventure stories and so on. Previous novel I did, Tomb of Empires, I was reading books on the history of the Seleucid Empire, Ptolemaic Empire, Nabatean Empire, Romans, Han Chinese, and several others in order to give me a kind of a world, to build the world of 90 BC in the Middle East. What did it look like, right? Because otherwise it wouldn't sound authentic when I wrote the novel. So there's that conditioning. So then the question is, to write Tales of Khayaal, what kind of conditioning do you need to do? So there were some books which came from like the fantasy genre. So for example, Brandon Sanderson, I really like reading his stuff like Mistborn, and then The Way of Kings and so on. Now his novels provide a great kind of structure of how to structure a novel, which is really interesting, right? A book like Dune with sci-fi by Frank Herbert is really interesting in terms of it's written in an omniscient narrator style of writing, which again is quite an interesting way of writing a novel and a very unusual way of writing a novel. So that's interesting. Silmarillion by Tolkien, which is really his creation story. And remember, Lord of the Rings is like an addendum, right? So the main story is the Silmarillion. And at the end, you have a couple of books, which is Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, which is actually what his publishers published. And they didn't publish the main thing, which is the Silmarillion. But that's really interesting from a creation story and how this planet of Arda was created and how the people were sent, the firstborn, the elves, the humans, the dwarves, and all that kind of stuff. So again, those were some influences from fantasy, sci-fi, but then there were also influences from history because in the story itself, Tales of Khayaal, we follow the destruction of a particular empire. Okay, when an organization called a syndicate arrives and things start to go wrong. Now, for that, you could look at things in the 19th century and organizations like the East India Trading Company, which was essentially came to Mughal India and eventually, like a giant kind of vampire squid, it put its tentacles around India and kind of looted and sucked India dry, right? So for that, to understand how the East India Trading Company did that to India, a great book was The Anarchy by William Dalrymple, and he's written several books on the Mongols in India. So that was a really interesting book to read from a historical lens. Likewise, a book called The Ottomans by Mark David Baer was really interesting about Ottoman history, how that unfolded. So there are several history books. And then there's a book by Peter Frankopan called The Earth Transformed, which is all about a history of the environment. And again, because we have a different environmental structure on the planet Ecleel, that was helpful for me to read to understand environmental science in a historical context. And then there were books which were more books like William Chittick's book on Ibn Arabi and some of his work, for example, that were useful to, again, understand some of the metaphysics, because again, within the story, there's an element of metaphysics within this planet as well. So really, those were maybe 15 books or so that I was reading to help condition myself before I even wrote a first word, because I didn't feel I was ready to take on the project that Peter asked me to take on unless I got myself ready, really ready. And then when I felt, okay, now I have some understanding, let me start attempting to write the story.
And he also has a phenomenal comic collection dating back some years, and we shouldn't deprive him of that that geek cred from a very impressive collection. So great blend of influences, I think, really went into distilling what became Khayaal.
I was going to ask what were the challenges along the way in terms of producing what you've actually produced, but I think you've answered that to some extent. It sounds like there was a lot of research that went into creating the final product, essentially. So what would you like readers or consumers to basically take away from what you worked on?
Yeah, I think there's different levels that people will draw from, and it depends on maybe there's your season of life. It's kind of like a certain book we might read in our 20s versus our 40s. If you've reached that age and gray hairs like me, then you bring different perspectives and life experiences to that, and you appreciate a rich work even further. So I think the reason why we took that time to really build the world and think of the broader arc over a series of books, and then the layers, the influences, reflecting themes that are very timely and pressing today, like the loss of sacred knowledge, or navigating post-colonialism experiences, identity, finding your way in a world of so much noise and distraction. These are the kind of broader themes that we're kind of addressing, but it had to also be a compelling, fun read for my 12-year-old, for example. And it's sort of 12, 13 plus, will I think have a great enjoyable read from it. But more, I think young adults, at different ages will read further into it depending on your experience of some of those things we were just talking about. Yeah, that's the way I kind of think about it.
Yeah, and I think any novel is multi-layered, right? You've got the literal level of the novel, which is the plot, what happens. So, like a 12-year-old, 14-year-old will read that. Oh, it's a great page turner. It's exciting. There's action. There's interesting characters. There's all this technology. There's this world. There's this kind of all this stuff happening. So that's kind of the literal level, the plot. But then you've got a deeper level, which is the allegorical level, which is what is the writer really saying? So an easy example would be something like Animal Farm by George Orwell. Yes, it's about some animals taking over a farm, but actually it's about the Russian Revolution of 1917 and what went wrong. So from an allegorical perspective, what are we saying? And there we're exploring that whole thing about what does it mean to be human in a time of great techno-scientific change, right? Then there's a third level, which is a deeper level, which is the moral level. So these are the moral dilemmas that you put characters under. Because when you put characters under pressure in a novel, you find out who they are. And it's the same thing in life, right? When things are good, everyone is lovely, right? But as soon as, things start to go a little bit wrong or a bit difficult, how do you react? Because that then is a reflection of your heart, right? You're driving down the street, a guy cuts you off. Do you give him the finger or do you just say, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah? So your true character starts to percolate. And of course, we all have difficult days where maybe we're not very nice. We're not the best version of ourselves. And that's just being human, right? No one is angelic entirely. But when you make that mistake, do you recognize it or do you compound the mistake? Because we've all done that, right? We've all given the guy the finger. And afterwards we thought, why did I do that? Maybe he was in an emergency, whatever, but do we recognize the mistake? Because once you recognize the mistake and you come back, then God is very forgiving, right? But if you compound it, then you make it worse. That's something else. So what's the kind of, moral dilemmas that you put characters under and what choices will they make? Because that's a reflection of who you are, right? And then there's the deeper level, which is the spiritual level, which again, we've kind of layered into the story, which probably most people are not going to pick up, but it's more like the spiritual wayfaring of every individual. And the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given every individual that fitra, that divine light is within that metaphysical heart of every human being. But, the world, the family, the places we grew up, it affects and it starts to veil, veils of darkness start to cover the heart, right? But are we willing to polish that heart? Are we willing to make it shine? Because the light is there in every individual, no matter how horrible they might be, it is still there. And so at that level, the story is about, you can redeem yourself, right? No one is a hopeless cause, right? And you just have to look at this, read the seerah, and you look at some of the companions, and yeah, they weren't with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the beginning, but they became. So it's your, if you cut everyone off, if you criticize people and you say this guy's like that, essentially what you're doing, you're ostracizing someone. You're cutting off the road of Tawbah. You're saying to them, you're a bad guy, let's just lock you up, right? And that is very much kind of a Western way of looking at the world. That's why, like in America, there's so many people in jail, right? Because it's like, you're a bad guy, let's just lock you up. Whereas our tradition is not that. Our tradition is no, everyone can change. You have to give them the opportunity. You have to give them the avenue for coming back. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is willing to forgive someone, who are we not to forgive someone, right? So within the story at the very deeper level is going to be played out. But again, it's very, very subtle.
Sure. It sounds like there is a great deal of tarbiyah or education, spiritual education that is being imbued within the story itself. So how do you basically approach themes of spirituality whilst not trying to make it come across too didactic, if that makes sense?
Well, Peter's done a lot of work in this area with a lot of his products and a lot of his career. Maybe you can start with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just share. Look, it's a big question, but I'll say part of it is how we present and communicate, and if you like, design the interface to those who are experiencing what we're working on, whether that is a physical product, a novel, or a digital experience. The language we use. So, for example, intentionally you won't find us writing on the book, Tales of Khayaal, an Islamic adventure, or a Muslim fantasy series. We don't describe in those terms. Some people might, because it might be convenient and to appeal to certain audiences, and that's fine. But we're trying to like Khayaal. What is the word Khayaal? Let's start with that. So if you go to Indonesia and say, what's khayal? They'll say in Bahasa Indonesia, it means daydreaming, right? Oh, someone who's a daydreamer, they're not paying attention in class, is khayal. In Urdu speaking, in parts of Pakistan, it's a type of poetry or even a type of song and is genre in some places, a khayal. In the Levant, it's, just means like imagination colloquially, but traditionally khayal, as I came to learn more about it, it's a very deep concept, this idea of seeing with your heart. And there's a very deep kind of science and tradition around this that you need qualified teachers to guide you on. So I think, but someone who's never heard or doesn't know anything about Islam, doesn't know anything about, Muslim cultures necessarily, it's a blank canvas of like, well, what is that? So we have taken that one word, and then throughout the story, it's meant to be very engaging and relatable, that anyone from whatever background will enjoy it, but certain people will find a lot more in there they're already familiar with. So I think, and the way we definitely, even we want to include Arabic in the identity, for example, but we didn't want this at all to be confused with Arabian Nights and, the Disney Aladdin more directly. But I think that comes to the craft of storytelling. How do you do that in a non-preachy, in an open way, wherever people are on their journey, how they could experience that story and benefit from what we're trying to convey. But I think Rehan's done that very beautifully, and there's a lot of art and craft in being able to create something that's very readable, enjoyable, engaging, page turning, but little sentences, little moments in the book where there's a bit of dialogue or something happens in the background. There's all these moments of delight and discovery throughout. I don't want to use the word Easter eggs, but there's plenty of moments of joy where someone who's been on this path, I really resonate with what just happened there. And I saw what you did there. Like every chapter has, I think readers, now traditional go, I see what you did there. I see what you're saying there. But if you haven't, you'll benefit from the intention of those things.
So Furqan, let me give you a practical example from the book. Now, any sci-fi fantasy story has a magic system or a system of powers, right? Like even with superhero genre, you have a system of powers. How do they work? And normally with magic systems in fantasy novels, there's like you either you access the powers through like a spell book or through a wand. Like if you're in, Harry Potter, for example, you access through certain metals that you consume. If you're, for example, in Mistborn with Brandon Sanderson, but essentially there's a system that you access the powers through. Now, in our one, to answer your question, the way that the characters access the powers, right? So first of all, they believe that the powers come from something called the source. And the source is in a celestial ocean that surrounds the throne of the creator. This is what they believe. They believe that the source comes from a celestial ocean surrounding the throne of the creator. But you can't touch the source directly because you'll just disintegrate. So you have to go through an element. You have to harness the source through, there are 7 elements, like sand and coralite and obsidian and others, okay? Now, but the way to access that is the heart, right? So you learn from how one of the main characters, Alifa, and her guide, Zorar, her master, he's saying to her, to access the powers, you have to see through the heart. Now, in the Quran, right, we're told, it's not the eyes that are blind, but it's the heart, right? So you have to see through the heart. So what does that mean at a metaphysical level? When you're seeing through the metaphysical heart, you are aligning yourself with, with the divine at some level, in terms of you're trying to make that connection. And that's what any sheikh or any teacher will do. Their job is to help you form that connection with the creator. So in the story, the master is telling the apprentice, strengthen the connection of your heart. And when you do that, you will access the powers, right? So there you have tarbiyah, right? Because what are we saying? We're saying to ourselves, right, that if I want to get close to God, I have to protect my heart, because the spiritual heart is far more sensitive than the physical heart. So for example, if I watch or listen to things which will damage my soul, that's going to darken my heart. And our teachers tell us, guard your sight, guard what you hear, guard what you say, because these are all inputs that will bring veils of darkness to your spiritual heart. And the more you can distance yourself from that, the more opportunity you have that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the malakut, you will get some divine inspiration. Because if your heart is full of those things, it's not going to come. It's not going to come. So are we doing that? So in that way, the way that the character's access to powers is a metaphor and a tarbiyah for us in this world as well. Does that make sense?
Makes a great deal of sense. So it sounds as though it's not simply storytelling, it's storytelling as an act of service, perhaps. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, you
as
could
well
say
as
that.
art combined.
Yeah.
So what do you feel actually makes a story timeless, let's say, having said all that?
That's a Rehan question.
Okay. Well, if you look at the great novels or great stories of the past, what they do, they speak to the human condition. And what have humans always been worried about? Humans have always been worried about family, about faith, about, God, about right, about wrong, about destiny, about marriage. These are the things that humans have always been worried about. So if you read, for example, the Iliad by Homer, written in the 8th century BC, it's a story about fate and free will. It's a story about many things, but one of the things, it's about fate and free will. Do I have a choice? Does Achilles really have a choice when he has to go and do what he has to do? Does Hector really have a choice when he has to do what he has to do? So that, if you think about it and contextualize it in the modern age, right, in the age of AI and algorithms, right, are we being manipulated by the algorithms? Do you really have a choice, or don't you have a choice? That is a fundamental question today, right? It's a human question about choice, about, fate and free will, about qadr, right? But that was the same question that Homer was writing about in the Iliad, right? So what great stories do is that they talk about the human condition, but the context may change. And so I think, what we've tried to do, I don't know if the readers will have to tell us if we've achieved it or not, we've tried to write about those, perennial human conditions that will appeal to people throughout the age.
You can see why I love to hang out with Rehan. It's always a benefit and a reference that goes back. And I think also, it's a simple but very timely, pressing concerns around companionship, loneliness, sahba. These themes come through, and what's our relationship to our devices versus our communities. And there's, for example, in the story, there's a technology called a scroll light. So it's like a scroll that you can imagine kind of, unfolds. Certain people can harmonize and work with a scroll master. And now that scroll light device uses a kamish, so a calligraphic kind of pen. And in book one, the technology is very basic. So it's these devices can communicate, peer to peer, one to one, almost like very early internet, very early, it's like text kind of style, and there's this lovely dialogue with the scroll master or around the shop where there's a couple of people learning about it. And someone's like, oh, so what if can I send it to many people at once or just you? And then someone kind of innocently says, well, no, why would you want to like send one message to lots of people when it's only just for one person? It's going to distract everyone, something like this. That's a very innocent thing. And it's much more beautifully articulated in the dialogue. But paraphrasing, it's basically like I laughed out loud when I first read the draft of that, going, "Well, you just described WhatsApp groups, It's like, yes, this is exactly the condition of distraction we face every day." So the book has lots of little moments like that, and you can imagine if it's a 5-part kind of story, some of the things that may evolve or devolve, depending on how you think about it.
And I think also on that, it's a reminder for myself and a reminder for all of us, really, that the fact is that, we come from a great tradition where a silsila, a chain of narration, authenticated what someone said. So if someone said something, who said it, who learned it from whom, who learned it from whom, that's our tradition, right? We are not of the tradition that I read that on WhatsApp. What do you mean you read that on WhatsApp? Like, who cares what you read on WhatsApp? Who said it, right? But unfortunately, the way the digital world has worked, we've become quite conditioned to thinking, well, I read it on WhatsApp, it must be true, right? So that's not our tradition, right? So again, we have to, I have to remind myself, and we have to perhaps all remind each other that really it's like, who said it? Because that way you'll cut through the noise, because the modern world is very, very, it's built on that dopamine model, right? So again, just realizing that, I guess, is important for all of us.
Sure. Thank you for that. It was very interesting. One thing I'm curious about also, since you've kind of touched upon it, is you've mentioned this concept of Easter eggs, or let's call them Ramadan eggs, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is the case a storyteller will always put an element of himself or herself within the story. Which moments within Tales of Khayaal have been personalized in that way? Which ones feel most personal for you?
Again, I've personally tried to stay away from putting too much of myself into the story, but I've put things that I have maybe experienced in my life into the story. So it's not about me, but it's about observations that I've seen, right? So in that way, I've tried to make the story appealing to everyone. And it's not like only people who are in their 50s like me will say, hey, I get that. Well, no, I mean, that's not the purpose of the story. The purpose of the story is that whether you're a 12-year-old or whether you're an 80-year-old reading it, and in our early reader group, we had some 15-year-olds read it and we had some 70-year-olds read it. And the feedback was really positive because they related to the human experiences. So to answer your question, Furqan, I avoided putting anything of myself into the story, but I put my observations of the world into the story. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think those kind of Ramadan eggs, if you like, I was referring probably more to, there'll be certain moments and even organizations or groups or behaviors that, as you kind of read, you kind of see what we're getting at. But maybe my 12-year-old won't pick up on those. They'll just see, oh, the syndicate, someone's sort of working this and working with the sultana to, have this or this kind of outcome. But some of those things become very familiar, like, I'm sure I think that's referring to this and that. And so that's intentional. At the same time, we haven't tried to, really just have a direct commentary on maybe what we experience on Earth in that direct way. So, for example, the city of Urua and this culture where they're kind of the flag, you walk in, there's flags of the hoopy bird around. It's sort of their beautiful capital, but it's kind of aging, and it's there's different factors at work within the city, but there's influences from Mughal culture or Ottoman culture there's the blue souk where, you know, the way the fountains are and the coffee shops are, you know, but then you'll have the scroll masters kind of space. There's things there that will kind of have, you know, very visual cultural kind of references, but it's not based on just one tradition. You'll be influences and other areas that you'll discover in book 2, as we're kind of writing that now and developing that, that will comment on other, they'll be very familiar which cultures are informing them. But again, we're not trying to just, you know, assume any knowledge from a reader that would know that culture.
Awesome. Rehan's spoken previously a little bit about AI and how that basically affects the human being or the relationship of the human being with AI. How do you see storytelling functioning in a very digital world that is becoming increasingly fragmented?
Yeah, look, I think a couple of things here. First of all, so I get often asked by budding writers, should I use AI for, you know, helping me write novels? Now, what I would say is that if you are outcome focused and you want to say, I wrote a novel, and you want to tick that off your bucket list, go ahead. Yeah, if that's your intention. If, however, you want to become a writer and you want to go on the writer's journey, then the very act of doing the hard work, the craft of writing, okay, that will, by doing that act, you will become the person that you are destined to become, right? Because you've done the work, right? What the outcome is, that's down to God, right? Whether you sell 5 books or 5 million books, don't worry about that. But if you just want to put it off your bucket list, I wrote a novel, go ahead, use AI. But if you genuinely want to go on that path of wayfaring, of suluk, of journeying as a craftsperson was, then why would you deny yourself and use AI to cheat your way through? Rather, you would actually do the work yourself, okay? So I would always encourage people to learn it by hand, first of all, right? Learn by hand, do the work, because when you're doing that work and you're crafting the story, so many things happen. Yeah, because, you know, like the late Harvard professor, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he wrote a book called Flow. And he was talking about flow states, and he was looking at painters and sculptors and athletes and other things. And he said, when they're in flow, they're in a moment of, you know, sub-creation, of just incredible things are happening. And they don't feel like they are doing it. They feel that something is flowing through them, right? So to get into flow state, you have to be in a distraction-free environment. You have to be fully immersed. Now, it's not just applicable to artists. You could be a coder. You could be doing a financial model. When I was working in a corporate sector, sometimes I'd be deep in a financial model. I'd feel like I'm in flow state, right? So it doesn't have to be just arty. It could be in anything, right? It could be with your kids, right? But you are in the moment. So something is flowing through you. And when that thing is flowing through you, we in the Islamic tradition would say you are in, we wouldn't call it flow state. We would say you are in a hal. You are in a hal. You are in a state. And when you are in that state, you do not know what divine breezes God will send in your direction, right? So if you don't do that, you may never get those divine breezes. You don't know. If you just use AI to short circuit, you will never be in the hal. So really, if by taking the shortcut, you are not investing in your future selves. And again, I would say to people, why would you do that, right? So, but using storytelling and AI, if, for example, you know, you want to use it to create, you know, mock-up boards, or you want it to help you with some research, you know, great. But the very craft of storytelling, I would never use it for that.
Sure. So you've used this word flow state. It's made me curious about something. Do you believe stories choose the storyteller, or does the storyteller actually choose the story?
Ooh, that's a difficult one, I think, to answer.
Wow, we're doing
Is it coming from the source? You know, is it one of those things where you're deriving all of this from, you know, to use your own terminologies, the source, right?
I think it's like this. It's like the saying that, you know, When the student is ready, the teacher will appear, right? Yeah, the student is ready, the sheikh or the guide appears, but you have to be ready. So I think in many ways, if I look back, what I would say is that many of my life experiences, things I've done, have been preparation for that very moment. Even this very interview with you, Furqan, okay? All the things I've done in my life have now come to this moment where I'm speaking to you. Yeah. And I could have been giving you completely different answers based on my life experiences, but I'm giving you the answers now based on my life experiences. Yep. So as a storyteller, I am writing the story based on all the experiences that I've had and that God has given me, whether they're trials, whether they're tribulations, whether they're, happiness or whatever it might be. God gave me those things, right? At that moment. Now, the question is, did I reflect? Right? And if I, as a storyteller, I haven't taken the time to reflect, I may miss the things that God is sending me. Right? And I think that's when the storyteller and the story align, is that when you take the experiences, you reflect, and then you write the story. I hope that answers your question.
Sure, it does. Thank you for that. I'm curious about something else. Your partnership basically sounds quite balanced. One is grounded in literary depth. The other is, of course, in design and world building, etc. I'm curious to know, what have you both learned from each other through the creation of Tales of Khayaal?
Rehan is an amazing chai maker. He has secret spices and some sort of cloves from parts of the world in his unlabeled jars. He just knows, right? So I learned what chai is, and that's important to set the majlis and the state, to create the hal. So I would say many things. I mean, there's a beautiful friendship. There's also a sohbah, companionship, in the creative and and spiritual path as well. Um, I would say many things. I've really I think there's a very holistic vision we both bring to this journey. We didn't sort of meet in a commercial kind of setting of like, okay, we can create a best-selling series here, and let's really work on the business model and then create a story, to sell well. And at the same time, having been in the kind of entrepreneurial journey for 20 years, you have to be sustainable. You have to have awareness of what it takes to, inshallah, set yourself up for those things to work out, and how you navigate all kinds of very practical decisions, from book design to crowdfunding fulfillment to partnerships and IP licensing. So I've had a lot of those kind of experiences. But I think from Rehan, many things really. One thing I think is the richness of history and his appreciation for ancient histories and peoples and populations, and those beautiful timeless messages and wisdoms that come through. But also just the adab of working with one another and with someone that's alhamdulillah been around many learned scholars as well. It's been a great blessing. So it's a really I benefit so much from the collaboration in every way, I think, alhamdulillah.
Yeah, and I think with Peter, I've learned a lot about video games recently, because I'm the kind of guy, last time I played a video game was 1984, and it was Pac-Man, and I didn't play after that. I used to collect comics, and I had a big comic collection in the 90s. But video games, I've been learning about new video games, been learning about AA, AAA. I thought AA and AAA were batteries, but I learned it's a video game classification or something. Anyway, no, but on a more serious note, I think what I learned from Peter is really, I think I appreciate the fact that Peter is someone who, everything he does has great ihsan, great excellence. And he is someone who likes to create beautiful products, services, environments, experiences. And that is our tradition, because God loves beauty, right? And he loves those who make things beautiful. So for me, working with Peter, it's been like, oh, wow, this is gonna, inshallah, he's gonna really bring Ahsan to everything that we do together. So I've been like really blessed the fact that we have, very similar teachers and that we study with, who've kind of aligned those hearts. And so I feel I've been very blessed with that opportunity to work with Peter now.
Awesome. Where do you think, looking ahead, where do you hope Tales of Khayaal will be 5 or 10 years from now? Because I understand it just based on how you explained it, that it's all being pulled towards the final standing, essentially. Is that the end point, or is there something beyond that?
We hope
Obviously, you only speak to
we hope
that
we
which
finish
you
it
can
before the
see.
real final standing. Allah help us. Great question. I think, we really focused a lot on intentionality and sincerity and getting the story right, the world right, and then each part of this journey, in terms of its, its tangible interface. At the heart of that, the core being the book series. So that's really where the world, the characters, the details, everything's defined. It's cohesive. We have a clear picture of what happens over this arc, how the technologies work or evolved, how, there's a clarity there that we spent the last couple of years or more working on. So I think, and ultimately the messages we're trying to bake within those, we hope that reaches many hearts, inshallah, or the hearts that it reaches, regardless of how many, they're felt, and there's some meaning in that. Of course, I think we're in a world where those stories can be experienced in lots of different ways, and of course, many young people. There's about 70 million people will play Fortnite or Roblox this week, right? As of this month where we are, that's a lot of people. But how are those hearts being affected? So what I think we'd like to do is, how do we thoughtfully enter different cross-platform media with that same intentionality? But we're also in a very hyper-competitive, saturated commercial reality in any of these areas, in pop culture or gaming or different types of entertainment and media, heavily saturated, dominated largely by very deep companies with very deep pockets that tend to own and they control how IP is used across transmedia. So we're kind of not ignorant of that's an very difficult journey, but also we're in an era of tremendous change, and we're in an era where we believe there's audiences that will resonate with what we're trying to do. So it's really nothing happens without Allah's permission. Not a leaf falls without His knowledge. So we hope that it's a beneficial journey for those that are joining us, inshallah.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I think I would concur with what Peter said. Nothing to add to that, really.
So as we wrap up, what story, whether it's from your own life, tradition, or imagination, do you feel is still waiting to be told?
Rehan, you can start with that one.
That's a really difficult question for Khan. I think, look, I think the greatest story that every human being will experience is the divine promise of returning to God, right? Because at the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created all of humanity, all the souls, and put them out in front of Prophet Adam. And he asked all of us the question, right? Am I not your Lord? And we all said, we all testified, yes. We said yes, right? And then this world is our journey back to God, right? So a point in time comes for every human being where there'll be a moment of transcendence, when you go from the physical into the metaphysical, right? And if you don't believe in that, and you believe that this world is it, well, I would say that's pretty depressing, because then if you don't achieve what you were trying to achieve in this world, I didn't get the job, I didn't get the Mercedes, I didn't get the mansion, I didn't climb Mount Everest, blah, 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 you're going to get depressed. And you'll start looking inwardly, I'm this, I'm that. You'll start feeling despondent and despairing. Whereas for people of faith who come from a tradition where you believe that this world is not it, this world is just the entry into another realm, right? That story is one of transcendence. That story is one of hope. So I think the story, certainly for me, is one that how would I be arriving at that moment, right? Because God sends all of us in a perfect state in this world. But and then how much more can I get back to that state? Or can I or can't I? Because, our endings are more important than our beginnings, right? How we end is more important than how we begin, right? And of course, Shaitan is always there, whispering and like trying to convince you otherwise. So there can be no greater story than every individual story of getting back to God safely, because he wants all of us to come back to him in a perfect state, right? So, but are we up to it, right?
Sure. So, Rehan, forgive me for this question in advance, but if one of your characters suddenly appeared in real life and he or she saw the state of the world today, do you think they tried to save humanity or just quietly go back through the veil and pretended that they never saw us?
I would hope that they would adhere to the prophetic advice. Even if the world is ending and you have a seed in your hand, plant it, because in the seed there is hope.
Very good. I like that answer. So, final question, inshallah. If Tales of Khayaal ever became a video game, which one of you is most likely to rage quit halfway through the final standing?
That is a great question. Well, if we played the game well, there shouldn't be any rage quits.
I don't even know what this is. Rage quit.
Yeah, that's good. That's yeah. Where you in frustration, you just quit the game. That's it.
Okay.
Unplug it. That's it. Khalas.
Okay.
So I'd like to say that maybe the real lesson, the real leveling up in a video game, is more inward, where the rage quits are not happening. So it's going to be a very interesting journey if we, inshallah, get to that video game. We have done some experiments. We've, we've speaking to different partners. So yeah, this will be one. And I think I'll just say part of the journey we're on, and I appreciate anyone listening to this in our community, is, what do we need? What would we like to see for our young people? For what should be designed? What might games look like? We're not going to come from a position of expertise of like, well, this is exactly what it must be. I think we have some. We'd like to inform what the story is about, but we'd like to. How do we thoughtfully design a game? And I think it's very much about community building at this point. Creating the people of the opportunities for people to come to the journey with us and what they would like to see. And so it's a question we could ask the group about that rage quit.
Yeah, and I think also the whole creation of the narrative. I mean, Peter and I, we run a course on how to design a novel, right? Which is all about how do you actually create a novel that is compelling, interesting, multi-layered, is virtue-based, and so on. And if you're developing a game, narrative arc is really important, right? You need to understand that. If you're writing a novel, you're writing a graphic novel, you're doing a comic. So I think that's something that, we can obviously share with you, and you can, maybe put it on the show notes and stuff. But that's kicking off in November, December as well. And we're really trying to encourage people of faith and, Muslims out there who, rather than raging about the stories coming from Hollywood, get busy creating your own narratives, creating your own games. But to do that, you need to have the right skills. So inshallah, we're doing something in November, December, like a 5-week course about how to design a novel, how do you design setting, character, plot, and then how do you imbue that with virtue. And then that gives you something practical to do. It makes things hopeful, right? Because everyone can rage and get despondent with the world. Well, roll your sleeves up and get busy living, and that way you won't be, depressed about things.
Very good. Thank you for that. It occurs to me also when we're talking about video games, et cetera, and so forth. There's an added element because you're not necessarily just creating a video game imbued with some level of tarbiyah or spirituality or whatever the case may be. You're also trying to perhaps inform people to use that technology responsibly and not being too immersed to the extent where that becomes their sole drive. Is that a concern as well when you're thinking about video games, by the way?
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, I know we're just wrapping up, but yeah, I think this is why we're trying to pace our approach to things. I think we're not necessarily just going to be looking, okay, what is the right formula that works well commercially or has the best mechanic, or what's the platform of the day, or what's the new tool that makes it faster to produce, right? Whereas, and that's a commercial reality that many teams are, having to navigate as well. I think right now our focus is this foundation of what is the message we want to come through, and yeah, you need to create a compelling gameplay experience, but where does that sit in the learning journey of that individual? We don't want it to ever replace traditional kind of learning that we might have benefited from, but yeah, we how do we create something that is appropriately engaging, but there's not endless loops and many of the other kind of dopamine tricks we know are there, but we know that you're stepping into that space. So I think there's a lot of decisions ahead. I think a key part is finding the right people, the right partners, and we're in that that process now. We've got some great conversations happening with, I think, people aligned, and any partner we work with, I think there's that alignment there, inshallah, first.
All right, awesome. Before the veils of darkness basically drop and my own scroll light battery dies, so thank you for your time. So I appreciate a lot of your thoughts. So if any of the conduits are listening, it would be nice to have some divine energy pointed towards us. Is that the right terminology I've used, by the way?
Well, we have a catchphrase for the story, which is called
Light and Ka.
yeah, light and Kha. So light as a nur, and Kha is this energy. So this is like the may the force be with you, or it's like live long and prosper. So this is like what Peter wants to put on every T-shirt: light and Kha.
Kha, okay, as in chai?
From Khayaal.
All right,
Kha is the energy. Kha is like the divine energy. So light
very
and
good.
Kha.
You got to read the book or the audiobook. I think the audiobook's a great experience. So
No, I'm looking forward to it.
Enjoy.
Thank you very much for both of your time. It was a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Furqan. Great to chat with you.